And joining us to talk more about that is our resident expert in all things Mormon, Bryce Blankenagel of the Naked Mormonism podcast. Bryce, welcome back. It's been too long, man.
It's always a pleasure, Noah. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I called you the other day. I said, hey, we were thinking about doing the Pearl of Great Price, and this was weird. I could hear you come.
Well, Noah, we're like, 3,000 miles apart? I wouldn't be surprised if your windows broke from the earth-shattering orgasm I had. I mean, I gotta say, I'm surprised that NASA didn't issue a statement that it was a threat to the ISS or something. I'm still in recovery here. So I want to ask you, Noah, what led to this? I mean, did you sit down with everybody and say, all right, what's the next holy book we're going to do? How did this come to be nominated?
Well, yeah, okay, so we actually went through a lot of different options on this, and basically it came down to me looking through all of them and seeing what we were really getting into, and when I came across Pearl of Great Price, it was the only one that I came across where I started reading through it and went, oh, this will be fun.
And right you are. So the thing is, if you want to know about Mormon doctrine and theology, the last place to find it is in the Book of Mormon. Right. I mean, you grew up, nominally Mormon, I think is how you've said it before. And you know that reading through the Book of Mormon, it tells you nothing about the church today. And that seems counterintuitive, but it's a common misconception. But the thing is, Mormonism claims 4 books of scripture. They have the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. So basically, the Book of Mormon is elementary school, whereas the Pearl of Great Price is high school, and then I would say Doctrine and Covenants is kind of like grad school, but maybe that's a conversation for the future. Anyway, so what is it? The Pearl of Great Price. It was canonized in the October 1880 General Conference of the Church, along with another, few other sections in the Doctrine and Covenants. So how did it get its name? Because that's kind of a unique name, Pearl of Great Price. Well, there was this guy named Franklin D. Richards who had a trunk with him in Liverpool, England, which contained a whole bunch of church scripture and documents and, non-canonized things. And he called it his Pearl of Great Price. So when it was canonized in 1880, they kept the name. So what's in it? Well, the Pearl of Great Price is a compilation of a ton of fascinating Mormon theology. So, you want to know about God being an alien from Kolob? You want to know
I do.
The writings of Abraham?
Do.
The Mormon apologetics for Joseph Smith knowing about relativity 35 years before Einstein was born. Enoch's drug trip when he was talking to God. Joe's drug trip when he was talking to God. And, of course, Mormon discrimination of people of color holding the priesthood until 1978. All of that, everything I just said, comes from the Pearl of Great Price.
Oh, okay, so the Pearl of Great Price is Joseph Smith's greatest hits album?
Sort of. I would say the Doctrine and Covenants are the greatest hits, and then the King Follett Discourse, that's his Billboard topper.
Okay.
The Pearl of Great Price is kind of the hidden bonus tracks that most people, including Mormons, don't know about. It's rarely cited or quoted in church, and it's even less frequently discussed in believing circles.
But it is universally accepted canon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going B-side. Awesome. What are we going to find when we get there?
So it's broken down into 5 different books. You have the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham. Then you have the Joseph Smith translation Book of Matthew. Then we'll get into it. Then you have the Joseph Smith history, and then you have the Articles of Faith.
All right. So it seems like the best way to go about this then is to take them in turn. So what is the Book of Moses?
All right, so the Book of Moses, this is kind of interesting. So a little background, Joe published the Book of Mormon in March of 1830 and then started the church in April of that same year. So he sent out the first mission troop of that year, and they passed through a town called Kirtland, Ohio, where they converted a guy named Sidney Rigdon, who was a well-known Campbellite Baptist preacher. Rigdon wanted to know more about the Book of Mormon, so he went to New York to meet Joseph Smith. They hit it off immediately, and they started a project of creating a quote-unquote new translation of the Bible.
Wait, I'm sorry, a new translation from what? They're from the Greek?
From the King James.
Okay.
Because they didn't know Greek or Hebrew or
wait, they were going to translate
Lutheran
it from English to different English?
English to different English. Translation.
Okay.
So early the following year of 1831, then that's when Joe told all of his dozens, nearly scores of Mormons to relocate to Kirtland, Ohio. And that's where Joe and Rigdon continued their translation of the Bible. So the Book of Moses is Joe and Rigdon's rewriting of Genesis from God's first-person perspective beginning on Mount Sinai. Just what you guys wanted, right? After reading the Bible and Quran, another retelling of Genesis.
But from the first person. Okay, so Chris Matheson stole this idea from Joseph Smith. Interesting. Interesting.
At least Chris Matheson's God has like a reasonable excuse of insanity, right?
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. All right, so let's talk about my early favorite here from what I've seen in your notes, the Book of Abraham. What can you tell us about that one?
Okay, the Book of Abraham's a really fun one. Okay, I did a 4-part series on this because it's a book that just keeps on giving. But we need a little background for this. So Joe claimed that the Book of Mormon was written by Native Americans on a book of gold plates in Reformed Egyptian, which I know I'm diving pretty deep down the crazy hole here. I know it.
But really, when we're talking about Mormonism, you have no choice,
That's
right? Like
true.
to talk about anything, you've got to dive deep into that crazy bowl.
Take my hand and let's walk down this journey. Yeah. So this book of gold plates written by Native Americans in Reformed Egyptian, Joe used a magic rock in a hat to translate it into Jacobean English, like the King James Bible. So as Mormonism gained popularity and picked up tabloids all throughout the early 1830s, people began to hear about this wacky guy, Joe Smith, who could read unknown languages. So put a pin in that for a moment. We've got to back up a bit further. The Napoleonic Crusades of Egypt opened up the world of Western science to ancient Egypt, right? So the field of Egyptology was actually born. In 1799, Napoleon's archaeologists discovered the Rosetta Stone, which was a governmental decree written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, Egyptian Demotic, and Ancient Greek. So Ancient Greek was known, but the 2 Egyptian languages had yet to be deciphered. The Rosetta Stone was the key to unlocking ancient Egyptian language and culture. Scholars and archaeologists, of course, pilfered and studied any artifacts that they could lay their hands on, and then they usually just sold them through artifact dealers.
Yeah, no, it's fun. As you walk around London today, you just see all kind of shit with, we stole this from the Egyptians because they hadn't figured out guns good yet plaques. Yeah.
Yeah, and really nothing is more Mormon than benefiting from imperialism and then creating a false mythology from the spoils of war.
Right.
So finally, I know that Heath and Eli are going to love this, but Francois Champollion deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1822, but it was another quarter century before his translation was popularized and widely known in American academic circles. So pull the pin out of Joseph Smith and his rising popularity in the early 1830s, right? Egyptian was a popular subject that people were talking about. It was something of a meme that we could call it. Now, historians today have actually coined the term Egyptomania to describe Western culture's fascination with ancient Egypt throughout this early to mid-19th century. So a guy named Michael Chandler was one of these Egyptian artifact dealers. He heard about the famed Joe Smith translating the Gold Bible from Reformed Egyptian and thought, hey, I bet I can make some money off of this guy. So he did.
Yeah.
In 1835, he sold 4 mummies and multiple scrolls of papyri to the Mormons for $2,400. And then Joe began the work of, quote unquote, translation, once again using his precious shit-colored seerstone and Mr. Hat.
And Mr. Hat. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that's like 68 grand in today's money.
Yeah.
We should also say, too, like there was a whole cottage industry of pseudo translation at the time.
Certainly.
Right. Yeah. It was its own little pseudoscience. It was basically the interpreting the crop circles of its day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's Egyptomania. A lot of people claimed to have a deciphered, Egyptian alphabet that they could, translate into English, but none of them proved tenable until Champollion's translation method actually became popularized. So Joseph Smith was just jumping on that bandwagon, right? And he began his translation of this Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1835, but it wasn't completed and published until 1842 as the Book of Abraham. Now, this came after the Mormons had been removed from 2 different states, Ohio and Missouri. They fought the Missouri Mormon War of 1838, and a lot of stuff had happened in that 7-year period, right? Luckily for us, the original notebooks that they used to create his translation in 1835, they survived the journey. And we can see his thought process today by looking at those journals.
Oh, cool.
And you can see these on the Mormon Church-owned josephsmithpapers.org. It's, it's complete and total bullshit. I mean, the Egyptian and alphabetic language that Joseph created, it probably will require like a how bullshit is it segment all on its own. But he did make a translation, but at first glance, you can tell he had no fucking idea what he was doing. Some of the characters in these notebooks have like 3 to 5 words that represent them. Others of these characters have over 100 words taken from one small mark on the papyri. And I know it's great for podcasting, but I actually copied a couple of pictures into the show notes just for your pleasure, Noah. What do you see there, man?
Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, so like this one hieroglyph is like 3 sentences. This one is 1. This one is 9. Like this one hieroglyph means an entire paragraph and a half of shit. Amazing.
So, I mean, I shouldn't have to say this, but there is no language that operates like this.
No.
Right? There's no language that's so efficient that it requires over 100 words of the translated language to explain like a backwards E with a long tail here, yet 3 other marks combined only make 8 words. It's just insane. But because this is Mormonism and facts are the enemy, Joe claimed that it was Egyptian papyri, which was written by Father Abraham himself. And apologists have been attempting to resolve the discrepancies, both with like the 1700-year dating problem and with the actual content of the facsimiles ever since.
17, like, Industrial Revolution, Mesozoic, what's the fucking difference? Am I right? Come on.
Right. It's like Native American wooden submarines, right? I mean, why not?
Exactly. I looked at a sword. That's how I know how metallurgy works. I looked really hard, though.
But they're really fucking invested in this, right? So a Mormon apologist named Hugh Nibley, he was kind of seen as, of the 20th century, the foremost Mormon apologist. He actually learned Egyptian in the late 1960s when the papyri were rediscovered for the sole purpose of crafting the apologetic case for the Book of Abraham. And about a dozen books have been written by Mormon Egyptologists attempting to carve out the quote-unquote historical plausibility for the Book of Abraham to be what Joe claimed that it was. But alas, that pesky thing that we call science really fucks with Mormonism, and even they admit it on their official website when it comes to the Book of Abraham.
Really?
Yeah, this is from LDS.org, Translation in the Historicity of the Book of Abraham. This is one of their gospel topics essays. Quote, none of the characters on the papyrus fragments mentioned Abraham's name or any of the events recorded in the Book of Abraham. Mormon and non-Mormon Egyptologists agree that the characters on the fragments do not match the translation given in the Book of Abraham. From further on, scholars have identified the papyrus fragments as parts of a standard funerary text that were deposited with the mummified bodies. These fragments date to between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, long after Abraham lived.
Yeah, assuming Abraham lived. Well, but so that's the hallmark of bullshit, right? Like when the real guys come in, they're like, no, this is just a really kind of a standard thing that we find everywhere. But when Joseph Smith translates it, oh my God, that's the words of Abraham himself that have somehow been preserved.
Yep.
Okay,
Scripture.
amazing.
Scripture. And it took less than 10 years after Joseph Smith's death for somebody who had learned Egyptian hieroglyphics to come along and say, no, this isn't real.
Yeah.
Like this is not how the real translation is.
which had to be so rough for the Mormons, because that would be like today, right? It would be like the aliens showing up, turning to the Raelians and going, no, man, that's not even close to what we were saying.
Like, I mean, A for effort, but no, F plus for execution, guys. Come on.
All right, but wait, there's more. Joey also did Matthew.
Yeah. So this is back to that translation of, the Book of Moses is like this new translation of the already translated King James Bible, right? So the Book of Matthew, or the Joseph Smith translation Matthew, you're going to find in the Pearl of Great Price. This is just Joe's rewriting of the Mount of Olives sermon by Jesus. Now, I personally, I don't know why this specific extract was included from the Joseph Smith Translation Bible, but it sounds like he rewrote it in order to prophesy of himself and also, of course, to fuel the persecution narrative that Joe leveraged repeatedly throughout his entire life. There's really not much else to say on that other than Mormon apologists sometimes claim that his Bible translation nearly got him castrated in 1832.
That sounds like a great story. But hey, look, if a few of these summaries weren't kind of pointless and boring, we wouldn't be talking about the writings of Joseph Smith now, would we?
Truer words never spoken.
Now, speaking of which, the next one is autobiographical?
Yeah, so this is the Joseph Smith history, and it ranks my second favorite in the Pearl of Great Price. The Book of Abraham, of course, is my favorite because it's so much fun. But the Joseph Smith history in the Pearl of Great Price, this is the canonized version of Joe's story concerning his early life, his first vision, and his acquisition of the gold plates and the translation method. Now, this version that you're going to read through, this is the version that Mormons are taught from a young age and the version that most of them consider to be historical truth. But there are a few problems because it's scripture, right? Notably, this was written in 1838 and published in 1842, meaning this is 22 years after it supposedly happened. And it's autobiographical, written obviously with an agenda, right? Also, there are other versions that predate this canonized version, and the differences are substantial. Now, Mormon apologists try to claim that the differences are there because Joe just simply tailored his early history to like the specific audience that he was telling the story to. Kind of like how we might tell a different version of how our day went to like our parents, to then our kids, and then to our significant others. But the differences aren't incidental details. They're foundational aspects of this story. For example, how many angels appeared to Joe in the sacred grove? Did it happen in 1820, 1822, or 1823? Did God appear, or was it God and Jesus as two separate dudes, or was it just a whole bunch of angels? Did God tell Joseph that all the religions are evil and their professors corrupt, or just tell Joe that he's forgiven of his uncontrolled debauchery as a teenager? Was the angel that appeared to him named, unnamed, or was it named Moroni, or was it named Nephi? Did the adversary bind Joe's tongue and hold him down to suffocate him before he could get the prayer out, or was that just convulsions from the datura? There are foundational flaws in this story.
I just love thinking about that list, like from the perspective of someone with no context. Right? There's, it's amazing how little Mormon shit you have to hear before it's completely insane, with or without context. But without context, that list is amazing.
Well, that's because this shit you're talking about is usually completely unbelievable unless you're indoctrinated.
Right.
Right. I mean, you ask any ex-Mormon some of the reasons they left, usually problems with the first vision, the Book of Abraham, or polygamy are mixed around as like the top three reasons why they left.
Man, I was hoping homophobia would crack that top three, but okay.
Okay, so I should rephrase that. So like these are the top three historical issues causing the current mass exodus, especially millennials, but like cultural issues are important as well, and usually homophobia or misogyny top that list. But as far as history goes, we are taught that this story is scripture and therefore axiomatic truth from a young age. And when we learn just a dollop of the real history, those Mormon shelves come crashing down.
All right. Okay. So, and then we wrap up on the Articles of Faith. What's that one all about?
So the Articles of Faith are actually pretty interesting. And I would wager to guess that most ex-Mormons in the listening audience probably memorized these as they were kids in primary, just like I did. And they actually have a pretty interesting history. Basically, they contain 13 points of basic and fundamental doctrine of Mormonism. Joe composed these Articles of Faith as part of a letter to the editor of the Chicago Democrat in 1842, the same year that the Book of Abraham was published, which was 2 years before his assassination. The editor of the Chicago Democrat was actually a well-known guy named John Wentworth, who Joe commiserated with frequently. A fun little historical detail here, Joe was even nice enough to give John Wentworth an honorary doctorate of law degree through the University of Nauvoo, Joe's own little, university city of the city, because the Chicago Democrat was friendly to the Mormons. And another editor, James Gordon Bennett, he owned the New York Herald and was editor of it. He also received one of these honorary doctorate degrees because of his favorable articles to the Mormons. But it's understandable because 1842 was a really controversial time for the Mormons, and any news outlets that were shedding a positive light on Joe that could be called a friend of the Mormons or, Jack Mormons, he was, quick to give them his praises.
Mm-hmm.
Joe even leveraged his friendship with the Wentworth guy and sent him these articles when rumors of polygamy and the Danites assassinating Governor Boggs were prolific. There were a lot of problems in 1842. And of course, these articles of faith, like all Mormon scripture, have been edited by the church today. But that's just for clarification, of course. No other explanation needed.
Right, like all of the divine revelations, it just needs to be clarified from time to time.
Yeah, of course. Clarified, edited, changed the words of God.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Yeah. All right, so let's take a quick broader view of all 5 of these taken together before we wrap up. So in terms of crazy, is the Pearl of Great Price above or below the Book of Mormon?
That depends entirely on your criteria of crazy, right? So it's more diverse and fascinating, but there's absolutely no continuity from one book to the next. They read like appendices to Mormon scripture. So Joe's theology only increased in crazy as his 14-year ministry matured, and you get snapshots from all over that period in this one little book.
All right. It's not saying much to say that this one's more diverse than the Book of Mormon, which just tells the same fucking story over and over again. Yeah. It's like saying, well, it's more diverse than, Utah.
Take compliments where you can get them, man. This is Mormon scripture.
All right. So it sounds like it's going to be fascinatingly crazy. How about in terms of so boring I want to rip out my eyes so I can hang myself with my optic nerves? Is it above or below the Book of Mormon in that one?
Well, so it's like, that's like the baseline of reading any scripture, but honestly, I don't think you need to worry about that and like being bored reading the Pearl of Great Price. It can be consumed in an afternoon. It's not repetitive, and the books never exceed more than 8 chapters, and the Book of Abraham even comes with awesome little pictures. I mean, this book is hyper distilled, wacky Mormon theology and history in potent little doses. This book is the fentanyl of Mormonism. So it's going to be a lot of fun for you guys.
Awesome. Well, way to give us the hard sell. Something tells me we might be coming back to you for clarification along the way here, but I can't thank you enough for laying the groundwork for us. And of course, if you listening at home want to learn more about the history of the Mormons that they don't want you to know about, check the show notes for a link to Bryce's serial Mormon history show, Naked Mormonism. Bryce, thanks for hanging out, bro.
So say we all know, a good hunting out there.